Hi, everyone, and welcome back again to the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture with TJ West, being me, of course. So, here at the Pisces Guide, obviously, I talk a lot about feelings, and one of the feelings that I like to experience is fear and terror and unsettlement, which is why for today's book anyway, I'm talking about What Moves the Dead by Kingfisher. Now, this was the choice of the Flag Book Club that I'm part of. We've been doing a lot of speculative fiction recently, and I'm very happy about that as a longtime fantasy horror sci-fi aficionado. And I'm particularly being drawn to horror these days. I mean, why not? The world's a shit show, so why not sort of embrace the horrors of, everything. So if you haven't read T. Kingfisher, and if you haven't read this book, then please stop now because I'm going to give some spoilers. So T. Kingfisher has written a lot of like gothic horror and sort of excavations, revisiting of classic horror stories. Obviously, in this book, it is The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe that Fisher is exploring. And obviously, in this case, the protagonist slash narrator is Alex Easton, who is a sort of non-binary character. They are from a nation that has multiple genders. So that's the first sort of change up to the traditional understanding of the fall of the House of Usher. They end up visiting Roderick and Madeline Usher in their decrepit mansion, and then of course there's all the usual stuff. Madeline seems to be driven mad. She seems to be catatonic, and there's an American doctor there. And as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that something is not right, either with Madeline or with the house itself. Now, here's where the spoiler stuff comes in. The spoiler alert is that it's the mushrooms, or fungal, this sort of quasi-sentient fungus that's been dwelling in the Tarn, which is the lake nearby the Usher mansion, which has managed to infect both the hares that lived by the lake before the Ushers came there, as well as Madeline herself. And so there's, the Gothic tradition is very much in evidence. There's the sprawling mansion. There's this strange young woman who seems to be afflicted by something that nobody can identify. The gloss, of course, is the use of fungi. Now, of course, this is very reminiscent of The Last of Us, which, the HBO show, if you've watched it, of course, fungi taking over people is not a new trope. It's obviously explored in a lot of fiction and in video games. But what I appreciate about Kingfisher is how well she manages to capture the ethos and the feeling of dread that unfolds within the Gothic tradition. Like, if you've read anything that's Gothic, or if you've watched, say, Mike Flanagan's The Hauntings of Bly Manor and Hill House, then you know that, a big part of it is these crumbling mansions that seem to have something about them, that there's something alive about the mansion itself. And, the idea that it's fungus is particularly unsettling, I think, because what more terrifying thing can there be than to lose control of your body thanks to an invading force that you can't fight? Now, given the fact that this novel takes place in the 1890s, roughly, give or take, it means that there's not a lot of scientific understanding of this, let alone how to fix it. And as we know from The Last of Us, there's not a whole lot we can do if some horrible thing like cordyceps becomes, translatable to humans. Now, I will say that the most terrifying thing about this book, though, isn't the mansion. It's actually the hares that are around that inhabit the lands. By hares as in the rabbit-like creatures. We first meet them, and there's something off about them, and it's because the fungus has essentially taken over their bodies and rendered them into these sort of zombie rabbits. And I mean, it wouldn't seem like rabbits or hares would make a really terrifying horror story monster, but boy, they are absolutely disturbing. They were one of the things I loved the most about this book, even as they scared the living shit out of me. And I'm very susceptible to fear, so I ended up not reading this book before bed because I knew it was going to creep me out too much. And the way that Kingfisher so aptly captures this sense of strange otherness that is part and parcel of zombification, whether it's due to a virus or whether it's due in this case to a fungal infection, whatever the case, there's just something really uncanny about seeing things that don't act like we expect them to. Like, you see a hare and you expect it to act in a certain way, and when it does not, it sort of short circuits your brain. And I think that it takes a very skilled writer of horror fiction to capture that. Like, it's a little easier to capture it in like the visual world, in like film or TV or even video games, but here it's much more unsettling. And it's the fact that Madeline herself has been sort of corrupted by this influence is even more terrifying, because she's very much like, when confronted with this, she's like, yeah, this fungus, although she doesn't call it that, she gives it this very strange gender pronoun, is like, It's not evil. It can't know. I'm just helping it to explore the world, and it's like it's the worst case of Stockholm syndrome that I could possibly imagine. And that's terrifying. Of course, it ends with the whole house being burned down and the tarn being pouring sulfur in there to kill the fungus. And all of that is really compelling. And I think that between the hairs and this one moment when Alex sort of steps onto the balcony and they see the sort of bioluminescent fungus glowing in the lake near the house, like that's where I feel like it's really kind of capturing like cosmic horror almost. Obviously there's a lot of body horror. If you've ever seen Annihilation, there's some of that in here. And it really just sort of forces you to accept that humans aren't nearly as powerful or as centered in the universe as we might like to believe. And I mean, for those of us, I think we all unconsciously think that's the case. And when we're confronted with the reality that that isn't, that nature is actually vaster and much more uncaring about our well-being than we might like to think, it can be quite terrifying, really. So that's why I think I was really drawn to this book. I had not read anything by T. Kingfisher, but I was like, wow, okay, I need to sort of make this writer a part of my life, and that's what I'm doing. And I'm actually hard at work on the sequel to this, which also has Alex Easton, who is a great protagonist, has a very witty, dry sense of humor. And of course, I'm always on board whenever someone invents, or puts into traditional literary canon queerness. I don't think it's forced, unlike what some other people said. I think it fits very naturally, and it ties in some interesting sort of subtextual ways with the way that Madeline, as I said, refers to the fungus itself in those weird gendered way, gender non-binary ways. So there's an interesting connection between those two things. So anyway, if you are really into Gothic fiction, if you love reading about zombie mushrooms, then I think that you'll have much to enjoy about What Moves the Dead. Great book by T. Kingfisher. Highly recommended. It's a good way to sort of like creep yourself out and have a nice chilling evening. So anywho, that is all for today's book recommendation from the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture. I'll be back in a little bit because I have a movie recommendation too, and I don't want to overstay my welcome on this edition. So anyway, go read this book. It's great. All right. Bye, y'all.